Hi, friends. I just wanted to share a quick few minutes with Abby Martin talking about doing an autopsy on the election demographics, the people who decided to vote for Donald Trump. And it's very interesting. And she gives a little breakdown of this. It's only about 10 minutes long. And also why it happened that way, why Latino, certain sections of the Latinx community voted for Donald Trump, which you would sort of think, wow, why would that particular community vote for a overt racist like Donald Trump? But she gives a really good breakdown of that. And also she sort of says what we need to do in the next 4 years, and that we shouldn't be fooled by Joe Biden, that he is going to be horrible, and that if we basically, and this is me saying this, basically if the Democratic Party, and we shouldn't expect them to do anything but it's like expecting a tiger not to have stripes, to expect the Democratic Party to do anything other than what they've been doing for a very long time. They're the worst of neoliberalism, they're warmongers, and Joe Biden has put into his cabinet all the worst possible people one could imagine. So it's going to be a very, very big effort that we need to get out in the streets, and we need to educate others that not to be fooled by what looks like somebody better than Donald Trump. And in fact, the only thing that Joe Biden is, he isn't an overt fascist, he is a crypto-fascist, and he is very, very dangerous. And there'll be a lot of people that won't go to sleep because the Democratic Party hasn't offered them anything. The Democratic Party has no policies. The Democratic Party, because it has no policies and because it's not offering these different minority groups anything, any hope basically, that means that the next time there's a competent fascist that comes along, like Eric Prince or somebody like him, that people are probably going to move towards that if the Democratic Party continues down this neoliberal non-policy path, which doesn't offer people anything, despite the fact that so many people now want Medicare for all. So many people think climate crisis is real and is a threat. There's so many different things that the mainstream media the corporate media has made out that it's some sort of a partisan thing, that some people care about climate change and other people don't, when in fact a Fox survey indicated that about 72% or 75% of people care about climate change, the climate crisis, and want something done. They want renewables. Or Medicare for all is another one. 75% of people in a Fox News survey said they wanted Medicare for all. So there are all these different things that are hidden to the public about what the public wants. And the Democratic Party have no intentions whatsoever of giving people Medicare for all. They're corporate owned, and that's why we need to push against them. And I could say the same about our government here in Australia. The two parties are kind of worse than useless in a way, and they prop up one another. They talk a good game, the Labor Party here, but they're not interested in really changing much. They're neoliberals and they're lackeys to the US empire. So this is a worldwide problem, and this is where capitalism needs to end. Capitalism is inextricably linked to imperialism and to fascism. And while we go down this dreadful neoliberal path into destruction, we've got to recognize that that capitalism is a big, big problem, and nothing is going to change until we actually have a nonviolent grassroots movement that addresses these issues, and that is in solidarity, is an internationalist with every other country on the planet. We're all fighting together, really, against extinction, and also for one another, because the oligarchy, the ruling class, the 1%, are only interested in their own lining their pockets, their only self-interest. They're narcissists, many are psychopaths, and they're interested in subjugating and destroying any country that hasn't submitted to them. So that's what we need to think about. in these next 4 years and push against and fight against what is an inevitable slide into extinction. Anyway, check this next bit out by Abby Martin, and such great analysis. I wish I was as eloquent as she was. I wish that I could break things down like she does, and that's why I'm playing it, because nobody does it like Abby Martin.
As I mentioned before, 7 million more people came out this year to vote for Trump than they did in 2016. And with all the pandering and direct messaging to conservatives and moderates and Republicans from the Biden campaign, what did that do? What did grifting entities like the Lincoln Project do ultimately? Well, nothing. In fact, they lost support from Republicans. Less Republicans came out than voted for Hillary Clinton. I think they lost Republicans by 3 points, which is tremendous considering how much was directly catered to bringing out Republicans, the quote-unquote moderate Republicans who they wanted to abandon Trump. If anything, I feel like Republicans gravitated more to Trump because they saw what a useful vessel he was. Back in 2016, they didn't know. He was totally unpredictable. They had no idea if Trump was going to be perfect for their agenda. He did nothing but prove himself that he would serve them loyally, bringing them the biggest tax cut in the history of this country. So if anything, I would feel like Republicans would have voted more for him. And guess what they did? So the Lincoln Project and all these other Republican grifting machines were completely pointless. And it wasn't even just that. It shows you what happens when you have nothing other than like we're restoring the dignity and character of this country. When you have no actual political program or policy prescriptions, this is what happens. Trump actually picked up minorities across the board. Every race and gender, except white men. Surprisingly so, he lost 5 points with the white male vote. He actually gained white women. The change from 2016 was black men up 4 points, black women up 4 points, Latino men up 3 points, Latino women up 3 points. To show you just how disastrous this was for Democrats, what an existential crisis it is for Democrats to actually have lost so many minority votes with open, unabashed racist in the White House because they have nothing to fucking offer. They have nothing to galvanize people around. And you look at some of these like Latino strongholds, like literally right on the border, like Zapata County, just north of the Rio Grande, Trump went up by 6 points. 6 points, where comparatively to Clinton, she had 33 points higher than Biden did. Like, think about how stunning of a discrepancy that is. Starr County, Texas, the most Hispanic county in the entire country, and the third poorest, where the per capita income is $7,000. Biden won by just 5 points. Clinton won by 60 points. That's really, really scary. That is really scary when Trump is running on his hatred for Latinos. But of course, like, Latinos, not just some like blanket voting bloc. There's several breakdowns of Latino voters. You know, there's like the right-wing Gusanos in Florida, the Venezuelan Cuban exiles. There's the Mexican immigrants. There's so many different people who comprise of like the Latino bloc, but it really does show you when you have nothing to offer people, when you have nothing to offer people whose per capita income is $7,000, people who are suffering, the millions of people who lost their jobs, who lost their healthcare during the pandemic. And when Trump was able to siphon those voters, like people who maybe believed that the reopen the economy mantra was a populist call, because there was no program offering for a stimulus, for national health care. So what happens to that block of people who get nothing from the two parties, and they just see one person, which is Trump, making that call, right? That we need to reopen the economy and save businesses. That becomes what people believe to be like a working class pledge, even though we know it's not. But that's what worked. And that's how Trump did so well. Like 80% of the people who said the economy was their number one issue voted for Trump. And that really says a lot. That really says a lot that 50% of voters thought Trump handled the pandemic well. You know, and And Biden, just the arrogance and the hubris, just like Clinton, that just thought that Latinos was a locked-in block for them, that thought black voters was a locked-in block for them. Biden political operatives earlier this year said that they didn't even consider Latinos part of their path to victory because it was just a given. And when you take like these people for granted, you're going to fucking lose. You're going to fucking lose when you offer people of color and people who are marginalized and oppressed in this country, when you just automatically assume that A, they're paying attention to the minutia of like politics, right? And the news and seeing all the fucked up shit Trump says and does. That's not what's going on. That's not what's going on when these people are struggling to survive. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. There's a reason why so many of these people gravitated toward Trump. And now, what is Biden doing as a result? Well, you already mentioned that John Kasich and all these other people are literally saying this weaponized talking point that the left is going to be punished. That actually they lost all these down ballot races, Robbie, because of the left. Even though you see these Fox News exit polls, which is hilarious that this actually happened on Fox, right? That showed the vast majority of voters, even though they voted for Trump, even though a lot of them voted for GOP Senate and Congress people, they all strongly believe in populist policies that are actually progressive. Like, for example, 75% of voters in these exit polls strongly or somewhat favor a government-run healthcare plan. Roe v. Wade, do they want to be overturned? 71% say leave as is. What does that say about the weak fight that the Democrats had just rolled over and died for the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett? Because of a political strategy. They actually thought that it would gain them Republican votes if they didn't fight her nomination. U.S. gun laws should be more strict. 55% of voters said more strict. This is according to the Fox News poll. What should happen to illegal immigrants in the U.S.? Pathway to citizenship, 72% versus 28% deportation. All of this really shows you where the people's minds are really at. If it weren't for weaponized disinformation campaigns and massive amounts of propaganda shoved down our throats to make us feel like these are super divisive issues that the country's like split down party lines on. That's not the case at all. At all. And we would be so much further ahead if it weren't for deliberate efforts on behalf of these institutions and shit to like suppress these monumental gains from happening, you know? How concerned are you about climate change? Very concerned. 50% very concerned. Somewhat concerned, 26%. So you take that together, over 75% very concerned or somewhat concerned about climate change, according to these Fox News polls. Increasing government spending on renewable energy, again, 70%. So you just keep going down with basically every issue. And then you look at like weed decriminalization or legalization, that's just off the charts as well. And what it shows you that the Democrats have a losing strategy where they're constantly just straddling the middle of the line, right? This non-existent like centrist appeal that literally just doesn't exist. And if they just took a strong stance on progressive policies, they would absolutely undoubtedly win because the vast majority of people want these things, but they never will accept that. That's why we can't, this pipe dream of changing the Democratic Party, moving Biden left. He's not a leftist. He'll never be a leftist. He is a centrist, moderate Republican. And that's all he'll ever be. And you see this revealed in his potential cabinet picks, which we can get into too. But we'll do a whole episode once we know for sure what those are, because I feel like it's just kind of all hypothetical right now. Like we know Susan Rice is going to be in there and she's terrible. We know John Kasich is going to be in there. He's fucking anti-abortion, anti-gay Republican. We know like the CEO of Quibi, the failed venture that like went bankrupt within months, is going to be potentially floated for the Chamber of Commerce. It's just like, how is this real? How is it real that these Republicans are going to be put in Biden's cabinet over people like Bernie Sanders, people who work their fucking asses off to get Biden elected? Not even a token progressive is going to be put in there just to appeal to this base. No, it's a slap in the face. It's a complete rejection and repudiation of all of Bernie Sanders' policies and his followers. And it really does show us how we need to be working outside of this two-party system, this two-party dictatorship, and build up an actual people's working class party that rejects this failed bankrupt policy of neoliberalism, because that's what people rejected in this election. And that's what you're not going to see from these cheering pundits who want to pretend like this was some huge victory for them. I'm relieved, and I kind of took a day to just take a step back and be grateful for the fact that we've gotten rid of the cancerous tumor that is Donald Trump. But I spent no time, and I wasted no time realizing our enemy, what we now have to fight against. And that's what we knew was coming for a long time. It's not just Joe Biden, and it's not just Kamala Harris. It's the entire ideology of neoliberalism. And it's the entire ideology of capitalism, of imperialism, of what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will represent. We can only go through so many iterations of this, right? Before it collapses in on itself. And we only have a few years to stave off, to have this advantageous terrain for the battle and for the fight that we need to be organizing in the streets, because that's really why it was necessary to get rid of Trump. It was a better terrain to fight against someone like Biden and Kamala Harris. And it's just up to us now to organize within our communities, get involved locally, and start building up these movements, because we know the deportations will continue. We know the wars won't skip a beat. I have not heard Biden talk about repealing any of the grotesque militarism that Trump increased around the world, the sanctions. I have not heard Biden talk about that at all. The economic war that is crushing so many countries. We know that he's going to immediately try to overthrow Nicolas Maduro. The only thing that Biden will do that will differ in the foreign policy realm is the Iran deal, which we already talked about could possibly be too late, because of how much Trump and his economic war strengthened the right wing in Iran and made them not trust the U.S. leadership. I can't say I blame them. And the climate accords, right? The Paris Climate Accords, which we know is not even remotely enough to stave off the worst effects of climate change, which we're already seeing wreak havoc in California and elsewhere. So, yes, we can take a breath for 1 minute, but we need to get back in the fucking streets and fight, because Joe Biden is our enemy. Because Joe Biden is horrible for every single person in this country and every person around the world who will continue to be subjugated by U.S. imperialism and U.S. empire.